Kia ora koutou katoa, and welcome to the first Te Pita Ora NZILA webinar for 2023. Thanks all for joining us. Today we're delighted to discuss Te Whakaoranga o Te Puhinui, the Puhinui Regeneration strategy, moving from strategy to action. This was the category winner in the Master Planning and Urban Design section of the awards last year, and also the recipient of the Charlie Challenger Supreme Award at the New Zealand Institute of Landscape Architects Awards 2022. Just a reminder today to remember to put your questions, if you have them, on the way through into the chat. And to kick us off, I'd just really like to thank and welcome our speakers today. We've got three of them. Firstly, Gary Marshall. Gary is the co-founder of the Auckland Permaculture Workshop, of Resilio Studio, and of Dark Green Aotearoa. With a passion for design and ecology, he was one of the lead authors of the Te Puhinui Regeneration strategy. Also with Gary today, Sara Zwart, Principal Regenerative Design Lead at Panuku Development in Auckland, the council-controlled organisation that delivers urban regeneration across Tamaki Makaurau. Sara is passionate about weaving social, cultural, economic and environmental outcomes into regenerative urban projects. And also today, Alexander Whitcombe. Alex draws upon the wisdom of his Māori and Pacific knowledge systems with the guidance of Kamatua elder wisdom holders to guide his practice. As a design strategist and systems weaver, Alex brings a collective impact approach as the empowered communities lead for Te Whakaoranga o Te Puhinui. So over to you, Alex.
I te timatanga o tēnei hui, a kino tātou. Tui ki te rangi, tui ki te whenua, tui ki te moana, tui ki te rena tangata, e rongo te pō, e rongo te ao, tihei, muri ora. Kia ora tātou, welcome to our presentation today of Te Whakaoranga o Te Puhinui, the regeneration of Te Puhinui Awa. Thank you for that warm welcome, Henry and team. It's a pleasure to be here today to share moving from strategy to action. This is the mahi gifted and interwoven into Te Whakaoranga o Te Puhinui strategy. Papa kiko ana nā tai o te mānuku o Huturoa, pākia ki uta, pākia ki tai. Tere tere haere nā wai mārere o te Puhinui, te awa koiora me te awa taururu, papa ki ora, hoki atu rā ki nā mātuku rua, ko mātuku tureia, rawa ko mātuku tururu. Ko nā tupuna maunga tawhito, tū te ao, tū te pō. Aro atu, te manawa ki a Manukau tangata rau, ara te pai haumako me te whenua makuru o te Waiohua, huri tai aiho, ko nā uri tā kirikiri o Whakaoranga, nā raukura mata-tahi apo ana, tūkua mai ki a piri, tūkua mai ki tata, tūkua mai ki Puhinui, kia whakaoratia tōna tapu, tōna mauri, me tōna mana, kia ki Panuku, kia ki Tangaro, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. So it's a beautiful mihi that encapsulates the whakapapa, the wairoa and the essence of Te Whakaoranga o Te Puhinui. And as you can see, translated on the right side, acknowledging the tides of the Manukau Harbour blowing gently across the shore, outward to the shore, to the stream. Its life-giving properties and life force across to the tupuna maunga, across the Manukau, acknowledging the rich fertile soils, being the descendants of Whakaoranga and the people of Te Waiohua, treasuring those precious feathers and coming together to be in a relationship with the Puhinui and its sacredness. So I think it's a really important context to set for our kōrero today, to think about all those intergenerational lineages, but also dimensions of our kaupapa. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So this image gives you the context of Tamaki Makaurau. In the center there on the screen, you can see a little tag of the Puhinui. It's a really significant body of water that connects to the Manukau Harbour, Te Manukunuku o Huturoa, one of the biggest shifting tides. I believe around 70% of water moves in and out of that harbour on any given tide. So you can imagine the life force and the amount of energy going through that landscape. It's also known as the Pātaka Kai o Te Ora, so the food bowl of the region and with the rich fertile soils. So you have the Puhinui Lake located right in the centre there, and with the largest Māori and Pacific population in the world, you can imagine how important and sacred it is to not only Tāmaki, but to the people of Te Waiohua. If we can move to the next slide, please. So it's just a zoom in idea. If you've ever taken an international flight or come into Auckland, you'll be able to get yourself familiar with Whitty. There's a wider region flying into the airport. The Puhinui is that water body, the river that's passing through. If you've been to the Auckland Botanic Gardens, you get an idea of where the headland starts. There's two sources of why that start at the top there and moves all the way through down into Totara Park, a significant park, pristine space in Auckland there, down through the residential areas of Rata Vine, Whitty, to Manukau Moor, Rainbow's End. If you've got kids and taking them to a location full of fun into that CBD area, it's also got your hotspot of the mall, institutes. So it's your almost your commercial centre in the centre there of Manukau. It flows out to the residential areas and industrial areas, a lot of industrial activity, down to the Tupu Lamona that I just referenced, past the 3 prisons, out past Clendon, down to Manireo Marae and out to the Manukau Harbour. So it's a 12-kilometre stream, awa, it's really, really significant. Normal slide. And so just for context as well, there's 3 parts of the catchment that really give you an indication of the state of the stream. So you've got upper catchment, a lot of plantings happening over the years with the Million Trees Initiative. You can see how pristine the water is, a lot of vegetation and species. You move further down into the residential area that I mentioned, we start to see built up activity, the concrete culverts where the awa sits at the moment and being redirected, and then down to the lower catchment there, out to the harbour. And I believe I hand over to you now, Sara. Thank you.
Kia ora, Alex. Tēnā koe matua mihi as well. Thank you for opening us with that beautiful mihi that was gifted to us by Waiahua. And I just wanted to acknowledge that people are joining us from all over Aotearoa, so we just wanted to take a moment to kind of ground you on where this project is. Some of you will know it well, others maybe not so well. But today we really wanted to focus on the idea of shifting from a strategy and into action and what that means, or even better into kind of systemic change, which was one of the outright intents of this project. I think we'll all kind of agree, and I just wanted to acknowledge this being the first webinar of the year, that it's been, excuse my language, a hell of a start to 2023. And more than ever, it's been really clear to us that systemic change is needed and our industry has a role to play in that. So hopefully we'll touch on that a little bit through our presentation about how this project has starting to shift how we inhabit and design our natural and urban environments. At the heart of Te Whakaoranga is the idea of Whakaoranga, which literally translates to the bringing of health or the return of health. It's really important to note that this isn't the job of any one discipline or any one person, which is why we've consciously decided to do a shared presentation with Alex, Gary and myself to try and show you all the different parts of the system that are working together to try and change and to bring whakaora to this place. So effectively, we're going to step through some slides that talk to each of our individual roles within this project and how we're, as I said, moving it into action and what we need to do to support and enable that action. I'm hoping it's going to be a conversation. So Gary, I'm really going to encourage you to turn your camera on if you're happy to turn your camera on. And there might be a little bit of interjecting between Gary, Alex and myself, and we'll try and move quickly so we can leave lots of time for questions at the end. I also want to apologise that we did present this very quickly at the NZILA conference. We're going to cover a little bit of the same material just to give grounding for the people that weren't there, but we'll try and go deeper with the time we've gone today. But one thing I wanted, sorry, I'm going to Realising I'm jumping back and forth on slides.
I can just provide a little bit more context with that last image too. So again, I was mentioning from the botanical gardens down to the Panuku harbour. So we've been looking at his entire ecosystem from Maunga to Moana, so from the ocean to the sea, and seeing it as a whole catchment, as a living ecosystem. And so the top of the, sorry, I could just go back a slide so I can just reference the botanical gardens. We've got the readout out there, which is one of the Maunga, and the readout being one of the, I guess, the garricks where the first, I guess, when the settlers and a lot of colonization was happening during that time, I guess, to acknowledge that there was that one of the points where the garricks are set up, so you got a really significant location there that you'll be able to see from both the west and the east coast, and it's a time where we've gone up there to celebrate Matariki, so it's really important to talk about the highest point. And then when you go down to the bottom there of the catchment, you've got the tupuna maunga that have been, one's been quarried away and become part of the roads of Tamaki. So you start to get an idea of how the significance of the landscape and what it means to the people and it means to Māori and Waiohua. So it's a multi-generational layered project that I think is really important for context when we're thinking about designing spaces. It's interesting.
Got it, Alex. I'm just going to briefly pause on this slide because it's an incredibly cheesy metaphor, but we intentionally put a waka on this slide, and it is because we wanted to kind of highlight that idea that unless we're all on the waka, you can't move strategy from action. So a huge part of this project was actually around kind of creating the will, capacity and alignment for people to work together to realise it moving forward. I just want to acknowledge that I previously was a landscape architect with Jasmix, and I chose to leave that role because I wanted to step into a central government role to understand what the kind of systemic and political barriers to doing a project like this were. So it was a conscious decision to kind of move away from being a landscape architect to being a project lead that would allow us to kind of see what that part of the waka looked like and how I needed to paddle from that position. It's also worth acknowledging that as technically the client on this project, it was a conscious decision that the client would sit on the design team. So I sat with the likes of Alex and Gary and co-collaborated throughout this project to try and understand the barriers that they were finding and unlock them effectively and try and create a process that would enable their innovation within this project itself. So yeah, it's a cheesy waka metaphor, but there it is. And I think you've covered this. I don't think I need to actually go into this anymore, Alex, other than to note that one of the observations from our mana whenua partners is certainly around the health of the land mirroring the health of the people. And in this catchment, it's really evident, being that the lower down the stream you get, the more ill health the stream has. And that's also socially evident by the presence of prisons in the lower catchment. So there's a really clear mirroring of tangata ora and whenua ora. But I'm going to take a bit of a flashback. This was where the project started about 6 years ago, and this was classic council thinking, where Panuku have this little, affectionately known as the T-shirt transform Manukau area that we work within, and we took this to mana whenua and they laughed and said, you know, you're never going to be able to restore a stream within a box. And from the outset, mana whenua challenged us, as Alex said, to think mai ngā maunga ki te moana, or far more holistically about this. So from that point forward, and from that gift of mana whenua, was this ability to think about the whole living system of this catchment. Another gift from mana whenua very, very early in the project, and I just want to acknowledge for those of you that aren't from Auckland, when we talk about Waiohua is the confederation of the 3 southern iwi in Auckland. So from the outset of the project, we've been working with Ngāti Tiata, Ngāti Tamaoho, Tiaki Taio Waiohua, and when we refer to Waiohua, we're referring to that collective iwi. But working with them from the start, they made it very clear that this was a project about ora or health, but it was a project about not just the health of the land, not a classic landscape architecture project. It was about a project about the health of whakapapa, and by whakapapa, they gave us this framework of tangata whenua taio, and that seems like a relatively simplified version of whakapapa, but actually this framework has been pivotal to all our conversations moving forward, and it's been really, really useful in that it necessitates collaboration across disciplines and across teams. It means you can't just be a landscape architect, you need to be a landscape architect to
All right, I think Sara's just frozen there for a second.
Do you want to add anything to that, Alex or Gary?
I think what's important to acknowledge here that the philosophy and approach to the project is multi-dimensional, thinking from a human perspective, from a nature perspective, and a whenua perspective. And usually when we, as a designer, as a design practitioner, we normally go after looking at the human need and dealing with people directly, but we forget about the other dimensions of taio and whenua. And so when you enable other worldviews and indigenous worldview to come to the picture, you start thinking in generations. So you start asking the question, who are we actually designing for? And we start thinking about designing for 7 generations, who's designing for the manu, the birds, the tuna, the entire ecology. So this has been a really instrumental framework to help ourselves and our partners be reminded around the actions that we make. And this is the aho have been huge in that practice.
That wasn't the slide I was expecting next. Another thing we used to very consciously create alignment around the multiple partners involved in this project was to set a really clear intent and purpose of the project from the outset. And the purpose, as you can see from it and the way Alex is talking about Te Manuku goes beyond the Puhinui itself. So the idea is that we're actually seeking to create change just beyond our own project. And in this case, it was around using Indigenous knowledge to rethink the way we inhabit and design our urban places and can work together towards a flourishing future. That purpose was co-authored with all the project partners in mana whenua, but the vision below was very much gifted to us by Te Waiohua, and that again is entirely about working together and the collaboration needed to move this forward. And just to talk about that kind of collaboration and alignment, one of the first huge wins that we saw from this project is it's actually the first kaupapa that Waiohua have worked on together in several generations. This is 3 iwi that have historically been in court together. They haven't always got on, they've often fought, and it was a huge tohu or sign of success for us just to get these 3 iwi really excited and collaborating together. And at the moment we meet them fortnightly for an hour and a half and see them more often than that. They're an absolute intrinsic part of this project team. And that's a huge win for them, not just on this project, but for other projects that they're now going on and collaborating on in South Auckland. So just wanted to highlight how things like an awa can actually be used as a unifying force and can bring people together around a common purpose. It was really clear from this outset of this project that we didn't want a static strategy, that we were working into an evolving and a living system that was constantly in change and flux. So we very consciously tried to create what was a dynamic strategy and that acknowledged that evolving living system. So what we did was working with, again, mana whenua, we created a Whakaoranga, or effectively a navigational tool that played on a Pacific navigation metaphor, again, the waka metaphor, but this idea of kind of deeply understanding the past horizon in order to be able to move forward to future horizons, and ultimately having this idea of te pairangi, which is the horizon beyond what you can see. So having this kind of really ambitious intent of this project that we have no idea how to get to yet, but we know the first step we need to get on that journey. And so the strategy itself went on to describe ngā pai tata, which is that 10-year horizon. So what can we do as this first step, but acknowledging what that vision is for the long term. And just quickly to touch on what the strategy is, and then Gary will go into this a bit more detail. We ended up with a combination of a physical works program, but also 15 rotaki based around tangata whenua taio again, or strategies that, as you can see from the ball of twine diagram, are very much interlinked. And these are strategies, some of them are already happening and we wanted to acknowledge what was already alive and moving in the catchment. Some of them are really, really aspirational and might take a few years to get off. Others we knew that we specifically needed to target and find funding for and get going in the near term. I think, Gary, you're going to go into that a bit more later. And as I said, we also resulted in a kind of coordinated and aligned program of works for specifically that Transform Manukau area, which will require partnership and delivery from the likes of Kāinga Ora, Healthy Waters, the Parks team, Eki Panuku, and private and commercial entities as well. So by getting them all on board and kind of working on this together, we were able to describe this this looks like a pretty traditional landscape architecture master plan. The reality of where we started at the very start of this looked a bit more like this. And I love this slide because it was one of the first workshops we did where we pulled all the various actors and players in the area together, and we said, what do you already have underway and planned? What are your aspirations for the area? And as you can see, there was a huge amount of energy, but none of this was being done in alignment. It was all being done quite piecemeal. And so the first step in this was actually just to come in relationship with all the other people that were active in this catchment and understand what they had planned and underway, and understand and map relationships of reciprocity. So relationships of how our individual projects or investments or energies could benefit each other and where we needed to come together in partnership. Do you guys, to either Alex or do you guys want to add anything to that, or should I keep rolling? Keep rolling. So that translated into a bit of a whakapapa-centred wellbeing project methodology. I can say very safely from the position of working in central in local government that a traditional local government project goes, we've got a problem, how are we going to fix it? Let's fix it like this. So normally you jump straight into the mahi side of a project and you start thinking about what you're going to do about that individual project. But with this kaupapa, we took quite a lot of time at the outset to understand the whakapapa of this place, to deeply understand kind of what the systems were at play. And then, as I said, we very clearly defined our kaupapa, which was the why, and you saw that with the purpose. Then we stepped into the idea of tikanga and how we wanted to be in partnership with each other, how we wanted to enact this. That's encapsulated by the charter, which I'll talk to in a moment. And then the fourth step was when we started to say, okay, therefore, what does it look like? And the fifth and final step that's still underway at the moment is this idea of an arotaka, or a monitoring and evaluation framework. Again, dual Te Ao Māori and Western science lens, that allows us to say, are we on track? Are we reaching those horizons that we intended to reach? And if not, how do we need to correct our course? What do we need to change? Then we go back to that how again and start again. So this is this idea of it being a kind of dynamic project methodology. I don't know where I was going to say that, but I also wanted to say that this wasn't easy to get off the ground. This was a new way of working for council. It took a year of writing and rewriting and lobbying to get the business case approved to even begin this project. So I don't mean to make this sound easy and simple. It's taken a lot of getting buy-in along the way to get people to I guess invest more upfront in that thinking. It was a significant investment through Panuku around that whakapapa, kaupapa and tikanga aspects. And we've very, very consciously taken a lot of people with us on the journey. So this is a little bit of a map around putting Te Puhinui at the heart as an entity in and of itself, understanding what governance wraps around that, who are the decision makers that influence the wellbeing and the order of Te Puhinui. Then we set up a steering group so that those governors would be in relationship with each other, built that map of project partners, engage the communities and the people of Puhinui, and then acknowledging that broader manukau and tamaki makaurau influence as well. Quick shout out to the steering group. We pulled this together about 4 or 5 years ago, and it consists of local boards, kāinga ora, Healthy Waters, Parks, Iki Panuku, and the 3 iwi. And we meet on a as needs basis, but again, this is this idea of co-governance was too complex in a project of this type at the moment. It's aspirational for the future, but instead of co-governance, we were able to at least bring this group into relationship and have a forum for them to flesh out collective goals before moving the project forward. I think I mentioned one of the key tools after we developed the frameworks that you've seen was to co-author a charter, which has now been signed by all the people you saw on the page before. But it does effectively, again, state that purpose, and then it states shared values and then responsibilities that we have towards the land. The idea of the charter was that it creates a compass that we can keep referring back to, and it'll inform all our projects within this catchment. And it's been created also as a gift for any other projects that are happening within this catchment from anyone effectively that wants to understand collectively what all the decision makers seek and what their values are. It's there for them, it's accessible on the internet. And they can start building on this rather than, I'm sure a lot of people on this call understand that constantly going back to mana whenua and saying, what do you want to see in this place? What are your values here? This is like a collective on the page agreement of their values that have been signed up to by all the other agents.
Just I'd like to add a bit of cordial to that too. So it's been a really instrumental navigation tool for many of our partners and actually working collaboratively. And to give you an example, especially when you're having to navigate between that duality of Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā, that those two worlds have been able to come in alignment. And this charter has been one of those vehicles that have been able to support that infrastructure and that conversation. So we've got something to fall back onto when we make decisions, see how we want to incorporate values. So it's been really important for me as a practice and a tool. And I can speak to that more within empowered communities working group.
Awesome. The other thing, I mentioned the arotakinga tool that's a work in progress at the moment. The idea is that that will refer back to this charter and say, how are we measuring against these responsibilities? How are we measuring against these values? Are we meeting them? Are we living up to them? I also just wanted to do a quick nod again to what we've experienced in the space of climate change so far in 2023. With a strategy like this, it's incredibly important to kind of keep it alive in front of mind and people's minds and keep almost justifying this piece of work. One way we have done that is to apply a climate lens to this. And obviously, if you bring order back to people in place, you are going to improve the resilience and you're going to improve the ability to respond to climate change. But we've very consciously put this frame on it and have had the opportunity to kind of articulate that through being a flagship project in Te Taru Ki a Tāwhiri, which is Auckland Council's Climate Action Plan. We were featured at COP26 and a few things like that. But yeah, I guess it's just that idea that it's not just about creating a strategy, it's also then how you keep it alive, how you get it in the media, how you talk about it, how you get people excited about it. And this is one lens that we're really consciously aware of within this work. Last couple of slides from me. I wanted to talk quickly about the idea of shifting into implementation. So we created the strategy a couple of years ago. It's in place now. We're moving into develop that work program that I set up. We're now moving into individual projects within that work program. And I want to acknowledge Isthmus. Some of you are probably on the call who are working with us, particularly in Hayman Park. And that's one of the kaupapa that came through that program around developing a far more integrated approach to water within Hayman Park and the wetland or repo within that. So this is one of the projects we've kicked off. Because of the foundational work that was done through the strategy, we've got all the relationships already in place that allows us to have a really integrated team around that. So we've got great landscape architects involved, we've got mana whenua at the table, we've got the parks team at the table. We're now also talking with Auckland Transport around their influence in and of around this park. So all that kind of foundational work is now having knock-on benefits for the projects as we bring them into action. Also, the charter has been used to frame up this project, and really critical things in the charter, like putting the water first, are really apparent when this project came through and the way we're designing, the park from the kind of repo out effectively and from the ngāhere out. Another project we're kicking off at the moment is Te Akarata, which is the section through Rātawain and the Te Whataoro or DHB site. Again, very consciously taking the learnings and the values set out by Te Whakaoranga Puhinui and applying that to a project basis. We've got a very integrated design process on that project, so we're very consciously have the engineers working alongside the designers, working alongside Alex with the social lens and the like. So it's flowing right through into how we deliver our projects. But I know Gary's going to talk a little more depth about that. Quickly, I just wanted to give a nod to the real and tangible benefits we've seen from this approach, having been 6 years into it. First and foremost, it's hugely supported and strengthened our treaty partnerships and our relationships with Te Waiohua. Mana whenua is, hopefully you're getting through this kōrero, are the superpower in this project. They're what set it apart. It's also built huge alignment and momentum and created a kind of field for change. So suddenly we've got people coming to us and asking how they can invest in this program, asking what strategic initiative they might pick up and be able to fund. We've got AUT looking at funding some food sovereignty work with us. Sustainable Business Network, I think Alex is going to talk to that, have come on board, and they've got a whole corporate responsibility program that's built out of the Jobs for Nature thing. So the project itself is now being delivered by multiple partners, not just us. It's inherently adaptive and flexible. We shifted focus really quickly through COVID. We had a very environmental focus at the outset. In COVID, we shifted to job creation and economic, again, through that Jobs for Nature program, and how we could start looking at employment pathways for people through this program. We've seen that growing of capability and capacity in ourselves and our partners, just like the cultural ability in our team lifted through our partnership. And also we've seen impact well beyond our investment and mandate. I'm going to hand over, if I can, to Gary.
Kia ora, Sara. Thanks for that. I was going to share two things today. Firstly, I guess given the fact that I'm a practicing landscape architect, I got asked, and given the audience today, I got asked to provide some reflection on what my role was in the project as a landscape architect. And I have, against my better judgment, scripted some of that, so I'm going to read it. I just wanted to make sure I shifted beyond the basic platitudes of we all worked really well together. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper. And then I just wanted to share, I guess, some of the work that's been happening since the project was ratified through the charter. So a small apology in advance of this bullet pointed slide, and I'm just going to run through some of the key things that kind of made this project different and unique from most other projects, or all other projects I've worked on, and a little bit of reflection about what our role was in that project. So if you go to the next slide, please, Sara. Cool. So enabling ecosystem in a high trust environment. Well, there was a bit of work to do in this space when we arrived, as a lot of the heavy lifting was done before we got there. And there was really significant alignment in purpose and intent. That was horizontally between Crown and Te Waiohua and other Crown agencies, but also vertically between the governance and the operation space. And this kind of what we call that enabling kind of human ecosystem sets the foundation for a high trust environment, which is critical for proper, like a genuine collaborative approach. Also, I guess from a bit of a personal reflection, we kind of do our best to kind of diminish our egos and deactivate our agendas in the space, particularly around what agendas we might have around our disciplines and what our disciplinary boundaries lie. And what we may want to achieve from a landscape architecture perspective. So kind of do our best to kind of leave those things at the door, knowing that that's pretty difficult at times. Trying to create a generative co-design space. So as noted, it's kind of that enabling ecosystem and that high trust environment is critical. But the space where it was a kind of a collaborative transdisciplinary space that I've never really experienced before. Which looks at where we had mana whenua representatives, clients, landscape architects, designers, as well as a whole range of people with different experiences and expertise, anthropologists, sociologists, ecologists, placemakers, community activators, all working together in various combinations, in pairs, in groups, in pretty dynamic spaces. So it was a really exciting time at the studio for several months where we had a whole cast of people coming in and out to kind of join in with the process. And one of the things that I found was kind of a little bit different about this process is my experience, often collaborative processes, or what are framed as collaborative processes, kind of, I think, are a little bit more like a tennis game, where the rules and the roles and the roles are really well defined, and the players kind of hold their space on the court, and the contribution to that kind of the game, if you like, is really about holding the space on the court and lobbing your kind of ball or your inputs across the net, and then waiting for that to be percolated on the other side, and then waiting for it to come back. And that often happens in spaces where you share an idea, it gets received, taken away, they do something, and they come back with some comments. Whereas the space that we managed to create here was much more akin to like the collaborative play facilitated through something more like a sandbox, where the places, where the rules are only really loosely defined and the roles and contributions are constantly negotiated. So that makes for a much harder work. But when you're playing a game like a tennis game, which is, don't get me wrong, they could be, you know, you can have a beautiful game of tennis, so I'm told, but the ultimate potential of that is defined by those rules. It's only ever going to be a tennis game, it's never going to be anything else. Whereas in a sandbox, it means that the potential of that system is constantly evolving, and there's no real predetermined fixed endpoint. So that that collaborative play box enables that space to really let the process evolve on its own terms. And then sort of within that space is what we ended up what we kind of found ourselves doing was holding the space for the co-creation and trying to facilitate that kind of co-design process. And some of the two key aspects of that, which we found, was this idea of active listening, which involves kind of valuing questions over answers, trying to understand the power of asking rather than answering questions. And we're kind of replacing this idea of advice with curiosity. And so we're always the constant asking, being consistently curious about what people are interested in and why they would like to be put that part of themselves in the project and others. And the other one was kind of, I guess, is trying to bring as much as possible the ecological and systems literacy to the space, where we are able to, and again, as best as possible, embrace uncertainty, recognize accepting uncertainty as part of the process, and not all the answers are necessary or even possible as we're moving through. So being able to frame those uncertainties and be comfortable with moving through, and being flexible, particularly in the space of COVID, but as well as even as down to some of the details about how you frame a more agile contract to be able to work with clients to allow for that process to emerge. And so that became a really essential aspect of what we did. And then framing the way forward. Excuse me, this is a little bit of a repeat from Sara's work, but maybe just a slightly different way of thinking about it. You can probably move to the next slide, please, Sara. That idea that is we never really had to pitch any ideas, because we were always in this co-collaborative space. We were consistently visualizing, testing, and trying to coalesce kind of conceptual frameworks. And so what we found with the Oranga framework, which was really gifted by Johnny Freeland, is that once we started to play with that a little bit, we realized that that became a really useful container which we could continually put concepts and ideas into. And we started shifting away from this kind of idea that you have a functional like a list of functional requirements or aspirations that just gets longer and longer and longer. And it's more like a container which starts getting richer and richer and richer. So once we landed on those frameworks, we've then started to be able to enrich it further by exploring kind of the interconnectivity between the various elements that started to emerge. And then also we started to, and then also with the Ngāpuā Oranga, which Sara spoke to, that idea that we had this time frame which allowed us to ground ourselves in the present, but then keep that really long-term distant horizons in place as we move through. And we're kind of finding ourselves back in a new present state with a new range of projects that are moving forward. And so this is, again, a constantly kind of evolving journey. So, you know, tomorrow never arrives. So as soon as we're in the present state, we're constantly looking to that near horizon again. And I guess is from the, there was a bit of reflection about maybe some of the collaborative process, but also at the end of the day, I'm a landscape architect. So when sticking to my knitting, we did a lot of work in Wai, Ngāhere, Kaitiakitanga, Mātauranga Māori, Matamatanga, and Honga, which is a kind of an energy strategy as well. And so those are the 5 kind of nature strategies. And then the whenua space, which is kind of sits more in the built environment areas, but it also involves spaces to do with food sovereignty and zero waste as well. And we've picked up, well, some of these projects have progressed since the strategy was ratified. And I'm just going to take you through a few of those now. So this is kind of the outline indicative path strategy, which landed in the strategy, and then that shift quickly to align with some of Auckland Transport's work in the space to do a single business case for walking and cycling in the Manukau area. And so that triggered the project for a feasibility study for the path. So in the next slide, please, Sara, there, where we started to look at this path, Manga to Moana connection along the awa, and creating a loop path in much more detail. And then we've got an overview of the path, where we've looked at material strategies, and we looked at more detail inside the T-shirt that Sara mentioned before, which is around the real connectivity back to the town centre. And if you could go to the next slide, please, Sara. So within that, we started trying to pull as many of the threads from the strategy together, and also lay the foundations for a richer investigation for the next step. So some of that involves looking at creating material matrices, trying to understand that this is a multi-decade project, and thinking more critically around what does it mean to select materials for a path which could take several decades to implement. And so calculations to do with carbon footprint are important, but there's also things to do with availability, durability, toxicity, and other things that we've started to take into consideration. I'm just wary of time. I want to make sure Alex has got enough time to speak so we can move relatively quickly. An ecological network map in particular, looking as a primary basis connecting Puhinui Reserve, the coastal forest and saline wetland and saline forest, coastal forest at the Panuku Reserve, with the botanic gardens, which you can see in the background of Sara's slide there. This work has given the sort of the social license for Auckland Transport to pick up and run in parallel. Next slide, please. Looking at how we can integrate ecological functions into some of our critical street infrastructures, which is provided, which is working with targets and measures. So there's it was kind of a handing on of the baton from Eka Panuku to Auckland Transport's environmental strategy. And we're now working with Auckland Transport and Auckland Council to start looking at that broader ecological connection across Auckland's urban areas. Next slide, please. So you can see we're zooming out a little bit further, and this map is starting to look at the connectivity of some of the larger patches within the South Auckland area, and starting to identify where some of those gaps are and how we might connect those up. Next slide, please. And then we've also been looking at marakai and some of the food production potential. And so one of the reasons why I love being a landscape architect when we think about the potential of place is that there's a place that we can interrogate and look for those kind of what the essence of that place is and what the potential for those places are through an ecological lens, and we combine that with human ecosystems of production and the framework that permaculture provides us in terms of different types of productive systems, and we can start to look at what types of marakai and might be possible through the Puhinui catchment. And this is starting to inform conversations about community orchards. Next slide, please. I was not at this hui, but Alex was. And so they're starting to use some of the material that we've been generating around the productive potential of Puhinui to start to inform on the ground initiatives such as this. Next slide, please. And you can see Alex in the foreground. Probably just you can go next slide as well. And then finally, kind of coming back to, I've got a lot of maps and diagrams, it's kind of what I do, but hopefully we're starting to ground the strategy again in place, and we've got a stream which is not in a state of well-being through a number of lenses, and anyone who knows anything about river dynamics can see that this channelized concrete stream is not reaching the full potential of this place. And we've started to, through the strategy, we started to visualize what might be possible here, but we really need to recognize it's not from a taiao kind of perspective, but it's the tangata and the whenua place in particular, and the kaitiakitanga and tiakitanga that the community will bring to the space, which will mean that it can reach its potential. And so next slide, please, Sara. And I will use that as an opportunity to pass over to Alex to unpack the tangata lens a bit further.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for that transition. So I guess just to provide a little bit of context, my original practice was in industrial design. So design thinking is the core methodology of way of working. And I guess part of working with the community and being especially integrated into this process of really unlearning that design process. So I'm a recovering designer in many ways. And I think it's important to acknowledge that design practice, but also through being involved in this process since the beginning, 2016, 2017, with that foundational years, working in the health sector, looking at justice system, looking at social and economic employment opportunities. This opportunity of being an empowered communities lead is a really unique position, really unique opportunity that's kind of formed out of many years of preparing that foundational work with the charter, the strategy of Te Whakaoranga Te Puhinui. So I think it's really important to acknowledge this as a unique role and opportunity. And they'll do two things: share a few reflections of this process, but also be able to talk to some of the action that we've been trying to achieve. So as Gary was saying, this is the tangata lens, looking at the people, mobilising the people, engaging with the people in relationship to the other two aho of taio and whenua. So always thinking in those three dimensions. And I think it's really important to acknowledge up front that we talk about innovation all the time. And what I've seen in our practice is innovation moves at the pace of trust. So trust has been that really core fundamental component that Gary's alluded to around high trust environments and processes is instrumental to making long-term change. So if we can just go to the next slide, please. So given that being in a design role, moved across the system, got a really good idea of how the community, they live reality, what's happening in that space, the changes that we're seeing come in the next few years. And again, like I was saying at the beginning, Manukau being, the gateway to the world, to the Pacific, and the awa being positioned there as a really unique opportunity for potential. So when I got involved in this process many years ago, we were essentially walking into a live ecosystem that has whakapapa that runs deep, that's emerging, has decades of work of community work and organisations that have done a lot for the communities, and then also thinking about the live reality. So that was really important to acknowledge when coming in as the Empowered Communities Lead, that to honour the mana of the work that's already been done and things underway. So this catchment gives you an idea of the amount of people that the different live reality that you can see in some of these images and the state of the taio. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So again, coming back to this framework, especially as a designer, usually we focus on the people, you would focus on creating a relationship. In my previous practice, it's always like you're extracting information, designing a solution and selling it back to someone. What's been really important about this is we're entering into an intergenerational process where you can't just fly in and fly out. You can't just do a 6-month project, build relationships and walk away. I'm actually in a role where I have to repeatedly see those people again and again. So that significance of being in a relationship with the people is really, really important. That's the #1 strategy we know as Māori, is kanuki kite, is that seen face. So being able to show up and put a face to a name and represent the project has been really, really core and key for the process. So as a designer, what we're starting to discover is moving from human-centered focus to what Sara was saying earlier, whakapapa-centered thinking, which is instead of going from transaction, you're going to being in a relationship. There's a huge fundamental shift in thinking. It's moving away from human entitlement, where people on the top of the pyramid, and you're putting people back into relationship, back into that circle. So going from triangle thinking to circle thinking has been a huge part of this process, and this framework has been instrumental to enable that thinking and really call for bringing our partners on board. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So again, just acknowledging a lot of work's been done in the past, and as we start to form this the strategy and charter, there was a whole lot of things bubbling away in the background, and we wanted to be able to enable the community to be a part of capital works projects, small projects on the ground that we knew were destined for change, and we tried to enable a process of working alongside the community, working in particular alongside schools. And this, as you can see in this image here, is a bunch of tamariki from Wiri Central, which is just behind Rainbow's End. And there was an opportunity to see what their lens could be like, look like through designing a playground. So we started to look at concepts of the aspirations, understand the lived reality, how they interact with the stream. We found out that a lot of kids don't know that stream exists, even though it's on their backyard. A lot to do with safety, dangers, and so we kind of unpick and demyst a few of those opportunities. But what we started to see now is what I think is really important is our young people are starting to see their identity, their ideas reflected in the landscape. So these young people are now, I've heard, just at high school, entering into high school, which is amazing, and they bring their siblings back to that playground. So it's a beautiful location and playground in the central of Panuku. Next slide, please. Another example is putting Indigenous knowledge systems at the centre of our thinking. And these are just, I guess, little pockets, little hotspots that have been going off in the background. And this is, again, thinking about Hayman Park as a wetlands, using our Indigenous thinking as a way to amplify the natural sounds of birds, running water, tackling one of the biggest issues that we have is noise pollution in urban areas. So really thinking about how we change our interaction with spaces. And what's been really cool is that some of these principles around Indigenous knowledge is being incorporated into local thinking. So what we're trying to do is activate spaces, give people experiences to imagine a space in a different way. So yeah, altering the landscape and giving people opportunities. Next one, please. Another example, we started exploring digital applications of digital applications. So this is Manu, another idea that sprung out of Te Whakaoranga Te Puhinui in its early stages to imagine how do you tell stories in the environment, and how can you merge Indigenous knowledge and technology, and how that can be around pursuing knowledge. So getting people active and moving without realizing the incidental movement, and then acquiring knowledge. So it's them creating that connection and being part of that change. And as you can see, the kids are able to color in that character, scan it with their phone, and it pops up on the screen. So these are just a couple of examples of great initiatives that have happened as the strategy was being formed. As we go to the next slide, please. And the next one. Yep, so as there's multiple things happening in the background, this role of the power communities became really pivotal and really instrumental for further collaboration. And essentially what my role has become is we're seeing multiple initiatives happening all across the catchment. You've got teams out there doing multiple cleaning days, engaging with the community, but there's a lack of visibility and alignment. And what we've started to do is form a working group to double down on those efforts. So those last 3 projects I just showed were just self-driven, passionate people that are wanting to do things. Imagine what we could do if we could collectivize their energy, share resource, share thinking, and create a catchment-wide ecosystem approach. So it's really important that we have this group started, and it covers communications, engagement with community, residents and business, but also activations, what I've just mentioned. So I think really important to notice is there's a lot of activity happening, and what we know in the community is the community initiatives move at a really fast pace, but this role has been really important to look at depth and how do we make sure everything's sticking together. And I think the importance of this approach for a landscape architect perspective is that social capital is really, really important, that we make sure we're maximizing those opportunities to build our community into the way that we're developing the space. As we know, like the lived reality in some of our communities, just getting by, they've got multiple things happening for them in transient homes. So if we create beautiful spaces, 6 months later, they could be damaged, polluted, and that's what we start to see with the awa there. It's one of the most polluted awa in Tāmaki. You got things such as mattresses and trolleys in the area, so it really gives you a really deep insight of where the state of play is, and we've got all these ideas, but we need to make sure we're maximizing those connections and opportunities. So the reason why we use activations as a tool to create experiences and get people involved and be part of seeing the change and being part of the change, like I was saying, seeing themselves reflected in the process is really important, because we always have that constant reminder that our communities are over-consulted as well. So it's a fine line and fine process that we're working through. The other thing I've noticed as well, that I've really had to change my language and actually remove design, technical language out of the way that we engage. And I actually don't mention it at all anymore. It's just become, I guess, second nature. And I guess one of the main drivers for me as well in this process is ensuring when involving all those partners who live along the stream and engage in the work, that they're not locked out of that process in years to come. So we've been trying to build really strong relationships with our developers and partners across the sector. I think we've only got a little bit of time, so I'll just go to the next 2 slides, please. Next slide. Just really quickly. So from this working group, we've got a 3-phase approach to the catchment, the upper and the botanical gardens, the commercial area in the orange, and then the bottom part is the blue. This is a corporate social responsibility day hosted at the bottom there with our local Indigenous practitioners, Te Waiohua, running a day with partners with Zen Energy and many corporates down there to try to get them to see how they can raise awareness and be a part of the restoration of the stream down the bottom there. Next slide, please. This is Hayman Park in the middle there, as I mentioned before, Whitlands. This is a Green Careers Expo to help our young people realise that they can grow their skills, earn a livelihood in green pathways, green jobs. Sorry. So it's multiple benefits. They are able to strengthen their identity, earn a living, and work locally. Next slide, please. So this is really important to acknowledge place, source, culturally, and community fed. As Sara was saying, the Sustainable Business Network has been really instrumental in the work we've been doing. To be able to see other organisations come through and pick up the pieces of the strategy and really drive it themselves has been a huge success of the wider approach. We've also seen a lot of ripple effects come through of working in a collaborative way, being able to attract funding through Jobs for Nature to look at social procurement for our young people, to create pathways, and so they can be local rangers, kaitiaki, and be able to work along the awa to see these aspirations come to life. So that's been really important as well. And last slide. Just going back to the arotakinga around evaluation. So we're trying to see how all these multiple initiatives are achieving the outcomes set out in the vision and the charter. And the last slide. And so now we've been able to form a working group that has regular activations in different parts of the catchment. So we're starting to create a work program and invite our community into that process. Last slide. These are our next steps. So continuing our ongoing partnership with Waiohua to enable their leadership, collaboration with our community partners, the completion of the evaluation and monitoring framework, arotakinga, implementation of strategic initiatives and capital works program, and continue to play an active role in the regeneration of the Puhinui and support wider funding and growing the sector. And this is a beautiful photo of Totoro Park up on the top of the catchment.
And I think we're heading back to Henry at this point because we've run over time by a minute and left no time for questions. Sorry, Henry.
Sorry about that. We failed for the questions.
I think it was designed that way. Look, just to wrap up, I just want to thank you guys, Alex, Sara, and Gary, for taking the time to share your kaupapa with us today. And it's really great to get these sorts of insights into our award-winning projects. So thank you for doing that on behalf of everyone online. And I think your award citation called this a model project, and that was last year. And I guess it feels even more like a model project given the events that we've had around the country over the last few weeks. So yeah, thanks again. We have run out of time. I just need to remind everyone before we shut it down that if you haven't already registered for our conference and coming up in May, have a little look at that on the website and give that some thought. It's shaping up to be a really good one, and should be a good time in beautiful Nelson as well. So thanks again, guys. Thanks to everyone who's joined us online, and see you next time.